Hello, everyone, and welcome to the May presentation of the Friends of History First Wednesday Lecture Series. I'm Ben Woodbury, and will be your host. These monthly lectures are being provided free of charge by the Friends of History and with the support from the New Mexico History Museum. We do, however, accept and encourage donations. These funds will go directly to support the lecture series and, more importantly, all History Museum programs and exhibits. Should you wish to make a donation, just go to our website, which is shown here. Just click on the donate button at the top of that page. If you wish to learn more about all upcoming lectures or about the Friends of History in general, we urge you to join our mailing list. If you have not already done so, either via our webpage or by emailing us at the address provided. We also continue to post this talk and all past and future presentations in the lecture series on our webpage. As a reminder, there will be no question and answer session following this talk. We look forward to renewing this dialogue when the First Wednesday Lecture Series returns to live presentation in the History Museum's auditorium later this year. Today, we are happy to welcome Tom Leach, the longtime curator for the History Museum's Palace Press. Tom served in this capacity from 2001 through 2021. He has received numerous awards for his work. The 2013 Santa Fe Mayor's Award for Excellence in the Arts, the 2014 Carl Herzog Award for Excellence in Book Design, and the 2015 Edgar Lee Hewitt Award. Under his direction, the Palace Press has published Gustave Baumann's Santa Fe, Indian Pottery Old and New, and most recently, Gustave Baumann's Book of the Saints. Tom also authored an essay in the 2019 Gustave Baumann Catalogued, Raisonné, published by Rizzoli Electric. Today, Tom will introduce us to the Baumann Archive, a bequest to the History Museum by the Ann Baumann Trust. So, let us now welcome our speaker, Tom Leach.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks also to the Friends of History and my former colleagues at the Fray and Angelico Chavez History Library and the New Mexico History Museum. As Ben mentioned, the archive contains gems and surprises, but I would like to sum it up simply as a treasure for historians and artists and lovers of New Mexico. I'll skip the usual Gustave Baumann biography. Not that it isn't interesting, but the value of this archive is that it goes so much deeper into not only the life and times of Baumann, but also that of his wife, Jane, daughter, Ann, and their many notable friends. In this first slide, we're looking at the day the archive arrived. I'm standing with Gayla Chamberlain and some of those 30 boxes. It was a great relief to all because the transfer of the archive from California to Santa Fe had been delayed a number of times by COVID. Next slide, please. This is the Baumann family's 1935 holiday card, greetings and all that sort of thing, and an earlier photograph from 1927 of Gus, Jane, and baby Ann. Let me begin with how and why the collection came to the History Museum. Ann Baumann, through the trust that she established to ensure her father's legacy, recognized that the History Museum and its library was the most appropriate home for this material. Ann believed, probably more than anyone, that Gustave Baumann should be remembered not just as another artist or even the major brilliant artist and craftsman that he was, but rather that he was central to the telling of New Mexico history in a time when it had barely emerged from its ancient past into an almost unimaginable future. Next slide, please. Here is Anne as a teenager at the front gate of the Baumann house, circa 1941, and later in life as many knew her. Anne was fortunate, as am I and the rest of us, to have a friend in Gayla Chamberlain. Gayla and her husband, Daniel Lino, are the owners of the Annex Galleries in Santa Rosa, California, near where Anne lived and worked for most of her adult life. It was Gayla, working for over 30 years, who not only compiled what resulted in the award-winning catalogued raisonné of color woodcuts of Gustave Baumann, but she meticulously sorted through and organized this archive into those 30+ boxes. She also painstakingly transcribed Baumann's often illegible, let's get the next slide, Baumann's often illegible handwritten notes on scraps of paper into over 700 pages of typed and readable material. This example of Baumann's handwriting, here he's writing to recommend the artist Tom Lee for a Guggenheim Fellowship. As the trustee of the Ann Baumann Trust, Gayla has been the caretaker of the Baumann legacy since Ann's death in 2011, and has deftly distributed Baumann's work to museum collections worldwide. So it is Ann Baumann and Gayla Chamberlain that we must, most of all, thank for this incredible and valuable collection. Without question, my research and all future research in the archive will owe a huge debt of gratitude to Gayla Chamberlain. Next slide, please. There are still other contributors to note, not the least of whom are Linnea Gentry and her sister Rita Gentry, nieces of Helen Gentry, a noted printer, publisher, and friend to Gustave Baumann and Jane. Helen was a fervent proponent of Baumann's efforts in publishing, and she corresponded with Jane and Anne after Gus's death in 1971. It was through Rita and Linnea that the History Museum and the Palace Press began in earnest to collect and document Baumann's processes. The how did he do that, as opposed to finished examples of his art, which is not to say that we don't have a few Baumann masterpieces. And what came to us from them were the first few pieces of this huge puzzle. The recreation of the Baumann studio in the Palace Press began with items from the Gentrys. And there are many other friends whose generous donations of materials and knowledge and skill have benefited the History Museum's collection. I wish I could mention them all by name now, but we won't have time for that, and they know who they are. The New Mexico Museum of Art, on the right, pictured in Baumann's 1920 postcard series, has the largest collection of works by Gustave Baumann, over 1,800 items. Where our archive differs, and we actually haven't counted the items yet, where our archives differs from that collection is that these are mostly written records, although there are woodblocks, ephemera, sketches, photographs, and even doodles. The collection largely reinforces the how he did what he did foundation and premise of our collection. Plus, and I think this is very important, through Baumann and many of his contemporaries in the first half of the 20th century, New Mexico was historically documented not only in words, the conventional academic form of scholarship, but also through such visual records as drawings, paintings, and photographs. I believe it is time that we look at their work not just as art or art history, but as history with a capital H. I've been privileged to be allowed access to these new files that will not otherwise be publicly viewable until cataloging is complete in the summer of 2023. The cataloging is being done by Alice Whaling and funded once again by a grant from the Ann Baumann Trust. I'm very impressed by what I've seen of the work completed so far. Much of that material will be digitized and viewable online, and that will be a huge gift to all of us, which is another way of saying We'll let you know when it's ready, so don't bug our librarians until then. Over the years, I've read just about everything I could find about Gus Baumann, and it is obvious that many writers are cribbing from what has been written before. I hope that when this archive is widely available, more original research and findings will enter the mainstream. I myself am guilty of writing things about Baumann that have turned out to be incorrect, so I know how easy it is to get carried away by supposition. Let's look at the next slide. I mentioned earlier Ann Baumann's efforts to protect her father's legacy. She did so with a feistiness and dogged tenacity. Here she is correcting Al Lohman at the Institute of Texas Cultures about some misinformation and suggests that in 10 years, a new piece about Gustave Baumann will be unrecognizable to me. Well, I hope not. In the same vein, here she goes after Bruce Babbitt, governor of Arizona. Next slide. The correspondence begins with the governor thanking Anne for the use of her father's lithograph. That was a red flag for Anne, who corresponded by correcting the governor, saying that he never worked with lithographs. All of his prints were color woodcuts. Next slide. In the next letter, she writes again to the governor, saying she didn't get a response to her first letter and is resending it. But she also writes to Bert Drucker, who was very connected in Arizona politics, and who no doubt had the ear of the governor. Drucker suggested to Anne that she should try to smear the signature on the original letter, to which Anne replied that she tried to do that and it didn't smear, indicating that it was an electronic signature and not signed by the governor himself. So in the next slides, we see finally a letter of apology arrives from Bruce Babbitt. But just to be sure, Anne smears the signature to make sure it's authentic. Trust but verify. Next slide, please. Another real find in the archive are 3 1915 letters to Baumann from Booker T. Washington on the letterhead of the Tuskegee Institute. And the last acknowledges that the prints, the first letter refers to prints that Mr. Washington requested of Baumann, and the last acknowledges that the prints were received. It was sent just 2 months before Booker T. Washington died. I have contacted Tuskegee University requesting any related correspondence in their archive, and while nothing has turned up, they were most enthusiastic about receiving these letters. Next slide. Here I might be name dropping, but I couldn't pass up these 1926 letters from John D. Rockefeller. The first on the letterhead of the Fred Harvey El Tovar Lodge at the Grand Canyon is simply addressed to Mr. Baumann, B-O-W-M-A-N, Taos, New Mexico. It requested 12 prints to be sent to Rockefeller's home in Maine. He also states how much he and Mrs. Rockefeller enjoyed their visit to the Baumann's, or I could say Baumann's charming home. Because of an insufficient address, the letter was returned to Rockefeller's secretary, who then forwarded it to the artist Bert Phillips in Taos. He sent it on to Gus. Once that was straightened out, Baumann sent the prints, and Rockefeller replied, listing what he would be paid for 8 of the prints, $170. I'm sure Rockefeller would be pleased to learn what his investment would be worth today. Slide 12, please. Baumann was scrupulous, bordering on what might have been obsessive compulsive when it came to record keeping. So much so that when we consider the time he must have spent on his inventory records, I am all the more astounded by the amount of work he was still able to produce. For instance, these are pages divided with a hand-drawn grid listing the titles of his prints, each numbered and organized by geography. Many of these exist. Next slide. And pages again of handwritten titles, numbered and mysteriously coded. Next slide. In about 1928, he had letterpress consignment sheets printed up with the titles and prints of prices. There are more than 50 of these showing where the prints were being sent and sold along with their prices. Next slide. We also have an address book with contacts both local and national, and a stack of index cards listing sales and prices. On the right, we see that in July 1947, he sold to Frank King, his friend in Kissimmee, Florida, the print Processional for $30. By no means did Baumann's record keeping stop there. I never thought I'd be interested in looking at income tax records, my own or anyone else's, but Gus and Jane's joint itemized IRS tax returns include household and medical expenses and payments to doctors. Next slide, please. On June 26, 1940, the Santa Fe, New Mexico came out with a special artists and writers edition, giving biographies of the many artists living and working in New Mexico at the time. Baumann clipped all of the entries and fit them into a scrapbook. This is a real wonderful source of information. This page shows Will Schuster, John Sloan, Dorothy Stewart, Raymond Johnson, Vernon Hunter, and Joseph Imhoff. There is another scrapbook with nearly all of his press clippings from the beginning of his career until the end. In addition to articles in the Santa Fe, Taos, and Albuquerque papers, he made the news in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Christian Science Monitor, as well as newspapers in Indianapolis, Chicago, Denver, Dallas, San Francisco, Tucson, and Phoenix. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier photographs in the Baumann archive. There are hundreds of them, many of them taken by Gus and Jane in domestic settings, but others that were used to assist a composition or subject matter for his prints, and some that were supplied to him for use in his commercial art. I was particularly fascinated when a few years ago in a local gallery, I saw Baumann's tempera studies for his 1917 Packard Motor Company calendar. But what caught my eye was the inscription on the painting. This is before it was printed. The painting itself was recently sold at auction. It reads, La Bajada Hill, California. I immediately recognized the scene from my own hikes on La Bajada and recalled that almost identical photos in the archive at the History Museum. This is interesting because the painting was done 2 years before Baumann came to New Mexico. So obviously he was given a similar photograph to work from. Next slides, please. Other images were provided by Packard, which may have been a reference for these paintings. Slide 19. And slide 20. This doesn't relate to any particular Baumann print, but is such a great photo. Even without the Baumann association, these Packard photos are an important addition to a record of early motoring. Like nearly everyone else, automobiles became a part of Baumann's life, and he recorded many incidents and adventures involving autos, from the horse and buggy days all the way to the purchase of his last car. He wrote, maybe he was an environmentalist, I think he was. He wrote, unless one needs a large car with its superior riding qualities as a status symbol, there is no reason for its gas-consuming weight. So now, having given up our 8-cylinder status symbol, we manage quite well with, guess what? A fastback Volkswagen. Slide 21. Another great photo, and it appears to be staged with a canvas sail as a background prop. Baumann turned it into a view of Provincetown Harbor, complete with seagulls and sailboats. Slide 22, please. Here is Processional, one of Baumann's masterpieces. First, notice the ink palette used to create the print. Just 4 colors hand mixed by Baumann, plus black not shown. There are 13 of these existing ink palettes for different prints, and they have much to teach an artist. I'm looking forward to working with these same colors in some of my own work. The photograph, and there are 2 more like this in the series, provided inspiration for the composition of the print. They were taken when Baumann lived on Canyon Road. Slide 23. Also to be found in the archive are printing blocks. My best guess is that there are a few hundred blocks in the collection. Here again is the 1935 holiday greeting and the block that printed it. Notice the silver foil, which is actually aluminum leaf, applied to its surface. For whatever reason, Baumann, in many instances, leaf blocks that had a special importance to him. But what occurred to me when I saw these 2 images placed next to each other is the simple beauty of symmetry that is at the heart of printmaking. It is almost metaphysical, like looking in a mirror and asking which image is real and which is the illusion. I had this experience more than 50 years ago, and I'm still enchanted by the question. Let's look at another print. Another masterful print, Eagle Ceremony at Tsuke, was published in Colophon, a book collector's quarterly, in 1932. I was delighted to find the black block in the archive because I had written to a number of collections searching for it. Again, it is surfaced with aluminum leaf. Next slide, please. Baumann achieved some notoriety from his 1912 suite of prints in the book All the Year Round, a poem by James Whitcomb Riley. In this black block for the month of January, as is often the case, the carving of the block seems more dynamic than the resulting print. Next slide. Baumann was almost entirely committed to working with wood. So this New Year's greeting for 1947 is a rare exception. It is one of the few blocks that he printed from linoleum, but I wanted to point out the lettering. Here, a script simulating a continuous strand of thread. Almost unnoticed in Baumann's graphic work is a mastery of calligraphy and letter forms. I believe a study of that is waiting to be done. And again, compare the playful symmetry between the block and the print. Next. When he wasn't doing something else, Baumann must have been constantly thinking with a pencil in hand. I was delighted to find these images of his trademark Koshari figure made up of the letters K-O-S-H-A-R-E, and it appears that he may have been working out the design for the first time on this scrap of paper. There are also 10 pages of designs for chairs. As you know, he also made furniture. Next slide. Here are pencil renderings he did in preparation for 2 books. On the left for the expanded but never realized Indian pottery old and new. Notice how he is working out the composition with drawings cut from different pieces of paper and fitted together. On the right, a drawing for Little Saints of New Mexico. It's the actual piece is a hide painting in the collection of the Museum of International Folk Art. That book was also unrealized until now. Next slide, please. Here are 3 books printed at the Palace Press using the archives as a primary source. Gustave Baumann's Santa Fe, Indian Pottery Old and New, and Gustave Baumann's Book of the Saints. I can easily think of 2 or 3 more books that could come from this archive. Next slide, please. There is also charm and humor to be found in this collection. On the left is a small painting, perhaps done for Anne. On the right, a Valentine made for Jane, which perhaps should only be shared between a husband and a wife. I had to ask the trustee if it would be okay to read it to you, and with her permission, here goes. Oh, sing me not about thine and kind, old favorite rhymes of Valentine. Sing not of heart, but the hiney and the porcelain pot, the favorite spot of our little Valentine. And you see the Valentine in the shape of a toilet seat. Baumann never claimed to be a writer, and it is true that his writing is often cryptic and hard to penetrate. I sometimes get the sense that his mind is running faster than his store of words. Yet it's hard to fault him, considering he had an 8th grade education, that English was his second language. Nevertheless, he expressed himself masterfully in so many other ways. And let's go to the last slide. I'll close this preview with a photograph of a younger Gus in Nashville, Indiana in 1915. I really believe that this collection is unparalleled in scope, and our hope is that it will be a source for projects, programs, books, and exhibits far into the future. Thank you very much, and don't forget to support the Friends of History and the New Mexico History Museum.
Thank you very much, Tom, for providing us with this excellent introduction to the recently acquired Baumann Archive. It truly is a profoundly rich resource. The History Museum is fortunate to have such a rich record of one of New Mexico's finest artists. For our audience, in closing, just a reminder that you can rewatch this and other presentations in the Friends of History First Wednesday lecture series on our webpage. If you wish to learn more about our upcoming lectures or more broadly about the Friends of History, we urge you to join our mailing list if you have not already done so, either via our webpage or by emailing us at the address shown here. As well, we request you consider making a donation through our webpage so that the Friends of History can continue this lecture series and support other History Museum programming. We look forward to seeing you in the months ahead. We look forward to seeing you in the months ahead, and thank you. Goodbye for now.